Hi, in this lecture you will learn why and how to overload the subprograms. If you know another programming language, you should already know about the overloading subject. For one who doesn't know, I can say that overloading simply means creating more than one subprogram with the same name. Why? Sometimes we do the same things with different parameters. For example, we may want to get the employee based on their employee ID or email or name, etc. In here, I want the employee with three different ways. But the important thing in here is I just want the employee. To do that, I need to have three subprograms or functions here. Right here, overloading issue comes to play. With overloading the subprograms, you can create these three functions with exactly the same name but with different parameters. With this way, you don't need to memorize three different names for the same purpose. Now I want you to remember the toChar function. We know that we can pass a number or a date as the parameter of the toChar function. Or sometimes we pass two parameters to that function. But at the end, it returns a string for the output. The main purpose of this function is returning the string version of that parameter. Up to now, maybe you thought that toChar is only one function, but this is not true. There are more than one toChar functions. When you call the name with a parameter, the database server finds the related function with checking the parameter types and runs that function. You will understand how it works better. But for now, you can understand the importance of overloading issue. Because up to now we thought that there is only one toChar function, but now we know that there are several of them. But this is not important for us. The important thing is I just want to get the string version of a value. Overloading subprograms is pretty useful when you use subprograms with the packages. Because maybe a lot of programmers will use your function in the package that you have created, but they will know only the name. Getemp, for example. They simply write getemp and pass a parameter. The rest is yours. They don't care if there is one or more getemp functions. Basically, overloading the subprograms enables us to create two or more subprograms with the same name. So this will enable us to build more flexible subprograms and provides us to overload the local subprograms and package subprograms. But be aware that not standalone subprograms. This is important. We know that we can create standalone subprograms under our schema. We can see them in the functions list or procedures list on our schema. So in here, there can be only one name with the same function or same procedure. There can't be two same named functions, for example. On the other hand, there can be many same named functions or procedures with the local subprograms or package subprograms. The parameters must be different in data types or orders or numbers. That means there may be two or more same named subprograms, but they must have different number of parameters. Or they must have different data types in the parameters. Or the order of the parameters must be different. But be aware here, because if the order will be different, it must also differentiate in the data types. I mean, if both two parameters are number, changing the order will not work. But if one is number and the other is string, for example, this time changing the order of the parameters will work. We will see that in the examples. But of course, there are some restrictions of overloading. If you overload a function with a different data type, but if these data types are in the same family or a subtype of another, this time it will not work. For example, if you have two same named functions and one has the parameter number and the second has an int parameter, for example, this will not be accepted. If you try to overload the same function only with the return type, it will not work. The parameters must be different in any cases. If your overloading code is not true, you will have a runtime error. Before continuing with the examples, I need to explain you how the database server finds or decides to write subprogram. It starts searching from the most inner place to the most outer one. I mean, if you overload the local subprogram, it first checks the local ones. If there are only one, it is directly executed. If there are more than one, it differentiates them by looking at the data types, finds the related subprogram, and runs it. If it cannot find in there, it checks the other one. If not, checks other one too. This goes on like that. When it finds the suitable one, it is executed. Great. Now we know why we overrode the subprograms. So let's open up the SQL developer and start making examples. Now, this is the example that we did in our previous lecture. We used the function getEmp in here in the procedure to get the employee based on the employee ID. But now I want to get the employee both with the ID and with the email and with the name. To do that, I need to make some changes first. As we call the function inside of the procedure, now I will use whole record in my procedure because I will use different columns of that record. So in here, I write p_emp, for example, and it's equal to employees %row type. And emp is equal to p_emp dot employee ID. Now, let's change our loop and send the whole record into our procedure. I simply delete here and send the remp directly. Great. Now let's run it first and see if we did correct. But before running, let's delete our table first. I simply delete emps paid. Our table is empty anymore. Now we can run our code to see if we did correct. And select from the table. Good, it works. Now we can overload our getEmp function. It gets the employee based on the employee ID. Now we will get the employee based on the email. I simply copy the function and paste right after it. I'm copying and pasting in here and simply change the employee ID with the email. Emp email, and it is email %type. And in here, write email is equal to emp email. Great. Now let's run our code to see if it can differentiate with the employee ID and the email. As you can see, no confuse. To see that better, now let's call the function with the email value. pemp.email. Now let's run it. Great. I called same name with different parameters. Now, maybe you can say that we could do that with some if clauses, etc. Why did we create more than one functions? Maybe you could do that with some another logic like if clauses, etc. But it would be harder. Besides, each time you call that function, it will enter the if clause, so the performance will decrease significantly. Besides, sometimes the number of parameters can be different. At that time, your job will be harder and worse. For example, in here, both of them have only one parameter. Now, let's overload our function and get the employee with the first name and the last names. This example will show you the difference better. So I simply copy-paste my function and change the parameters and the where clause. I'm copying and pasting in here and writing fname, it's employees dot first name %type. And let's say L name is varchar2, for example. And my where clause, where first name is equal to f name and last name is equal to L name. Now I will change the function call. So I simply write pemp dot first name and pm dot last name. As you can see, our function takes two parameters now. Now let's delete the table and run our query again. And now run the code. As you can see, it worked. Now let's check if it inserted. As you can see, when we call our function with the same name, the database server searched in our anonymous block first, it found the proper function and ran it. By the way, even if there would be another stored function in your schema that has completely the same parameters, the local function would work anyway, because we know that it checks the closest one first, so the local function will work. Great, to see that better, now let's call that function with three different uses in one step. Let's simply copy paste our function call in the insert. I copy that and paste two times in here, and in the first one I write pm.employeeID and for the second one I write pm.email. Now let's run it. And now let's check the inserts. As we can see, it worked for all the usages. Now here is the thing. What if I write hire date instead of the email, for example? Let's see it then. I simply write hire date in here and run it. As you can see, we had an error because there is no function getAmp with a date parameter. Since we passed a date value for the getAmp function, the database server could not find a proper function that has a date parameter and return an error. But notice that it's a runtime error. The compiler could not find the problem. We faced it when we ran the code, so you should be careful on that. Otherwise, you will have a runtime error, and runtime errors may cause some irrecoverable problems. Okay, in this lecture, we did our examples on the functions, but now you can use it with the procedures easily. You simply write another procedure and change the parameters. Changing means the order or the type or the number of the parameters. Great, now you know why we use overloading the subprograms and how we do that. So this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next one.